We never thought or even could believe the Americans will just withdraw, signing a deal with the Taliban, bypassing their own partner, in this case, the government of Afghanistan. I was in Kabul. We were supposed to go to Doha the same day to have final round of negotiation and agree on something, at least on something. And I think whatever political agreement was better than giving Afghanistan like that just to the Taliban. In the morning of 15th of August, Sunday, I still remember because that's a historic day on many ways, not in a good way. For us, there was an invisible kind of tsunami in Kabul. And the Taliban had a very strong propaganda. People would say, oh, Taliban are entering Kabul from this side, the other side. And this is when you need the leadership. I texted one of the members of the negotiation team in the Taliban. We knew them. So I said, what's happening? And he said, I can assure you that we will not enter Kabul until 2 weeks, until the negotiation gave an outcome. So we are not entering Kabul. At 1:30 or 2, we heard the breaking news that the president fled. And by 3:30, the Taliban were in the palace. So we were watching when they showed the palace where the flag was changed from 3 colors to Taliban black and white color. Everybody in the home, they all started crying because it was like a nightmare.
In this episode, we had Fawzia Koofi, an ex-parliament member in Afghanistan, and she was the vice president of the National Assembly. She was also part of the delegation who negotiated peace talks with the Taliban in Doha, and she represents the fight for women's rights and women equality.
Yeah, very interesting conversation. I highly advise you guys to go and check out her latest book, The Favored Daughter. Like and subscribe.
Yeah, if you like what we're doing, and check it out.
The Inspire Us Podcast.
Your story caught our attention directly when we heard ex-member of parliament, vice president of the National Assembly, negotiated peace talks with the Taliban, all that as a woman, in the context of, Afghanistan and the Taliban, we're like, wow, this is crazy. And now that the Taliban is in charge, the fight must not be any easier. So how has it been? And
I know, Alex. You're not the only person to be surprised by the fact that Afghanistan had parliament where there were women in the parliament.
Bring that mic a little bit closer to you, yeah.
Again? Shall I start again?
No, it's okay. Keep going.
It's okay. No, I was just saying that, you're not the only person to be taken by a pleasant surprise that, there were women members of parliament in Afghanistan. I must say even 26% of the parliamentarians were women. So out of 249, there were 69 women parliamentarians in the lower house. And then you had also the same percentage in the upper house. You had women who were chairing parliamentary committees. But this is in the last 20 years. If you look at our history, throughout our history, women had always had a very mixed kind of societal role. At some point, they were ministers and members of parliament. And in fact, women in Afghanistan started to have the right to vote before women in Switzerland did.
Really?
In our history, yeah. But also there were moments that, they were completely erased or not to the extent that they are now. But so the women movement in Afghanistan is full of ups and downs, so to say that way. However, I think the Taliban, the way they demonstrated their policies on women, I think it's kind of the zero location or the last stage of suppressing a nation or a group of people for their gender or a race or anything. So, yeah, for me to come from that experience of being in the parliament, leading the parliament, being in the negotiation, being part of the progress of my country, feeling connected, feeling belonging to the point where I still have to continue to do the same, but with no country. It's very hard.
I can imagine. And the story really took the eye of the global world with the US pullout, all those famous videos of the airport, this took the world by storm. But maybe you can take us back. I know that before all this happened, there were talks between the US and the Taliban, with the original Doha talks. And there's a period from that point to them taking their final, soldiers out. What was the feeling in Afghanistan when there was first those talks about the US pulling out?
So when the United States first time started negotiating with the Taliban was 2011. There was on and off bilateral meetings here there about certain things, but officially they allowed the Taliban office to be established in Doha. This was 2011.
Mm.
During the time when President Obama announced his exit strategy. He used to call it exit strategy from Afghanistan. So he wanted to withdraw all the forces, the military presence, by 2014 and keep some forces not in military form, but like a mentor. And the whole operation changed from ISAF, which was International Security Forces, to Resolute Support, which was basically fewer in number.
Mhm.
They were there to only mentor our security forces. So this was the President Obama's exit strategy. That's why before doing so, they allowed or gave the approval for Taliban office to be established in Afghanistan, in Doha, sorry. And it was a surprise and a shock for everybody in Afghanistan because remember, in 2001, when the Americans came to Afghanistan, we all remember the famous statements from President George W. Bush when he said in October 14, 2021, he said, we are now going to Afghanistan to help people of Afghanistan fulfill their democratic rights, dismantle the Taliban and, Al-Qaeda. And they used to call them terrorists for almost 20 years, right?
Mm.
Not only the Taliban, I mean, all the groups that were in Afghanistan, they used to call them terrorists. But all of a sudden, from that huge policy shift, you come and you say, well, we want to now talk to them. So it was a lot of surprise to the people of Afghanistan. But we never thought or even could believe that things will end up in a way that the Americans will just withdraw, signing a deal with the Taliban, bypassing their own partner, in this case, the government of Afghanistan. And I think that was the huge shock. When President Biden, the deal was signed under President Trump, on 28th of February 2020. This was the time when they signed the peace, so-called peace deal between Americans and the Taliban. But the peace deal had 4 articles, one connected to another. So the first article was the Americans will withdraw from Afghanistan after a political settlement is agreed upon. So there was a condition. But when President Biden came to power in 2020 actually, he then, 13th of April, I remember, he announced unconditional withdrawal. And this was the moment that we were like, the country was in shock. People felt betrayed, not because we wanted American troops to be in Afghanistan, but because of the way they dealt with the whole situation politically and militarily.
Mm.
I guess that was what was so shocking. It was how abruptly the US had left. I mean, they didn't even contact the UK or the people on the ground to say that they were leaving. They just left imminently. And it's like you've been trying to reconstruct and build Afghanistan, and all of a sudden they just gave up. It was quite alarming.
Yeah, when I was in the negotiation team, I was actually so much hoping that the outcome of this negotiation will be signing a political agreement with the Taliban, after which the United States and the rest of NATO and their allies could leave. And I was always dreaming of that big picture in the history where we sign an agreement with the Taliban, a peace agreement, and women are part of it in that history picture. But it doesn't happen that way. Not only we were excluded, but also their allies like the UK, European, and other countries were also excluded from the main decision making. And during the negotiation, I remember one of the generals, the military generals of the Americans came. She was like my friend. She came and said, "What is your plan B, Ms. Koofi, for when the negotiation does not succeed?" And I said, I actually got emotional because this was the photo I was always imagining in my dreams, in my mind. The frame that I had was, we sign a peace deal and women are part of it, major part of it. But you basically, live with that memory, with that, thinking and that idea that you will eventually have that peace agreement when somebody else is thinking about plan B. It's a lot of emotion, right? So when she said, "What's your plan B of leaving Afghanistan?" I got emotional and I said, "I don't have a plan B and I don't want to leave my country and I want this peace process to succeed." So I think a lot of European partners of the US also felt left out, including the UK.
Yeah.
While, when ISAF forces, which was the international security, the international assistance mission for security forces in Afghanistan, when they were in Afghanistan first, they were led by United Kingdom. So the whole operation was led by United Kingdom. But when they decided to leave, nobody was consulted.
Yeah. And it was also, I think a key point here is that I think by around 2014, the situation on the ground, it was a lot more manageable. The US didn't have as many troops on the ground. It wasn't as costly, less casualties, but they still pulled out so abruptly. And perhaps it's a product of this isolationist America. I'm not entirely sure why Biden.
True. So true. Yeah, if one has to look back and see where things went really wrong and how this could be avoided, if Americans really wanted to leave the way they left, the best time would have been 2014. Because then our security forces were not as weak as morally, I'm saying, as they were in 2020 or 2021. Our state was not as fragile because when there was a negotiation going on in Doha, it directly affected our state moral, like the moral of our politicians, our security forces. It created division. And some American diplomats who also were like, with original Afghan background, they actually also played it very wrongly. So that also contributed to demoralizing the state of Afghanistan, the republic, after 2014. But 2014, we had much stronger institutions, including the parliament, our army, our police. The Taliban were not as moralized and boasted as they were in 2021. So I think if they wanted to leave, really, 2014 would have been the best time, because I think then the collapse would have not been the same way as it was in 2020.
So you think the Afghanistani government had the ability, or the situation was stable enough for them to just continue and see over this transition process? You think?
I think so. I think politically, I think our forces never actually were defeated. They were not defeated. Because it was after, like the Taliban fought our forces for 20 years, right? And in 20 years, they were not able to capture one province. We call them provinces, and then districts. They are like the first administrative board, administrative offices. Yeah. So they call them provinces, and then geographically smaller one is the district. So in 20 years, the Taliban were not able to control one province by force. That means our forces were strong enough. It was politically, when the negotiations started, our forces started to become demoralized and lost hope and lost optimism, and districts started surrendering because they knew that, well, if Americans signed the deal with them, they're going to come anyways. So there is no point in us fighting. Also, our political institutions were stronger. There were more political unity among our security political forces in 2014 or even before. When we started having a national unity government, then that was the moment that more political fragmentation happened. This is in 2014, and the president who fled was the president. He was somebody who had the power to, to divide instead of uniting. And what Afghanistan needed was, and needs still, is the like unity, not the division. So before that was a different government, a different leadership, and things were much more stable. If they wanted to leave, we would have never collapsed the same way we collapsed in 2021. Also, we collapsed because the former president fled, escaped Afghanistan.
What was his name again?
Ashraf Ghani.
Oh,
Ashraf
okay.
Ghani.
Yeah, it was kind of shocking to when I saw on the news, Afghani president leaves in helicopter, and you see the video of him leaving.
Yeah, very cowardly move.
No, we don't have such a. I don't think in recent history, except Syria, that now you had also President Assad doing the same thing, or then Bangladesh. I think some other countries followed his footstep. The leaders, I would say Bangladesh, like their prime minister fled, Syria. But before that, in our history, we didn't have such a. An experience of the president fleeing while the situation was quite okay.
What was it?
I mean, it was okay. If he would have stayed and mobilized our forces politically, at least there was some resistance.
Yeah.
And then that resistance would give us, the negotiators, the time to agree on a political settlement in the meantime with the Taliban.
So if he had stayed, you don't think the Taliban would have taken over in the fashion they did, essentially?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if he didn't flee, the Taliban would have not dared to enter the same way. And we were supposed to go to Doha. I was in Kabul. We were supposed to go to Doha the same day. We were supposed to go to Doha with a chartered plane to have final round of negotiation and like agree on something, at least on something. And I think whatever political agreement was better than giving Afghanistan like that just to the Taliban, right? Because even if it was an agreement with 40% power sharing, was still manageable. You could, eventually navigate, and like when all the political forces were in Afghanistan, all the civic forces were, probably it was easier for us to then find our way and influence the Taliban. Now, Taliban are the only force in Afghanistan, So everybody else left or fled Afghanistan. So I think if he didn't flee the way he did, Afghanistan would have not fallen, because obviously as a president you set role models, right?
Yeah.
After you will be your security ministers.
And even just the act of fleeing is a little bit like it's the final act, like we surrender. We're giving you the country. We're not fighting anymore. It gives that message out to people.
That was the whole thing. The message was very.
Yeah.
So do you think if he had stayed, we wouldn't have seen those clips of people clinging onto the plane? Do you think his leaving kind of initiated that widespread fear?
There was when in the morning of 15th of August, Sunday, I still remember, because that's a historic day on many ways, not in a good way for us. You could feel Kabul was like, basically there was an invisible kind of tsunami in Kabul. People were already frightened, some people, and the Taliban had a very strong propaganda. People would say, oh, Taliban are entering Kabul from this side, the other side. And this is when you need the leadership, right? The political leadership to come on public, on media, and reassure people and say, we are here, we will defend you, we will protect you, our security forces are there. And this is when you need like the chief of army and, the security to come on media, on state-owned media or private media, and say, don't be panicked, don't, reassure people. Instead of that, there was a complete silence in Kabul, and people were just going to the airport. And partly why people were going to the airport was because all of these, the evacuation process started. And all these people who were working with embassies or international organizations or NGOs, etc., or human rights organizations, they told their staff to go to the airport because there is evacuation planes coming. So this was already happening, plus the fear the Taliban are coming, the propaganda of Taliban, and a lack of leadership, the vacuum where the leader also fled to the airport.
Yeah.
So a combination of all, but I think if you had a strong leadership who would just stand somewhere on a TV and say, don't panic, I ordered the security forces to stand and protect the citizens, I think the situation would have been different.
Because I still find it so crazy. You see those videos of thousands of people just walking in the airport. You even see the people outside of the planes clinging on to it. Me seeing it from far away, I see this, I'm like, they must be in so much fear, because what are you thinking being outside the plane? This is death,
I know, and two of them died actually.
Yeah, there's videos, you see them falling out of the plane.
Out of the plane, two fall out of the plane, and one of them was a football player.
Really?
Seriously?
Yeah, one of them was not like, an ordinary,
Civilian.
Civilians from the street. He was a football player who actually, not very prominent, but a football player.
Wow. Can you talk us through where you were and what you were feeling and what you had witnessed during this day?
I was at home. I was in Kabul. I was at home. As I said, we were supposed to go to Doha. My staff went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get Qatari visa for my daughters because I wanted to take my daughters with me this time to the negotiation. I was thinking maybe the situation will get worse, and security-wise, and there will be fighting in Kabul or surrounding areas, because already there was explosion and targeted killing, etc. before the Taliban take over. So I wanted to take my daughters with me, with the fear that maybe the war will escalate, and so I want to be relaxed when I'm in the negotiation. So we were going for the last round of negotiation. So my staff went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to get visa for my daughters, at least the letter to send to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Qatar. When he went, he called me and he said, it's such a huge traffic, no cars move. Everybody wants to go to the airport. I don't know why. So I just got out of the car and I'm walking to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I was surprised. Why this? I went to the balcony of my house. From the balcony, you can see the street. It's opposite Intercontinental Hotel. You could see the main street, where there were thousands of cars in the street, and people were getting out of their cars. They were going to the airport. These were mainly the people who, as I said before, were told by different countries that there is an evacuation, not because of the Taliban were entering, but there was an evacuation plan for those staff that were working with organizations, maybe with the fear that if war, expedite and escalate, or the Taliban return. So because there was a lot of uncertainty, so these organizations wanted to evacuate their stuff. So my staff said, traffic is very bad. I'm going to get out of the car and walk. And I said, do that. So he walked and he went to the ministry. It took him half an hour from my house to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he called and he said, most of the head of departments are not in their offices. So only the assistant and secretaries are there. And I said, I called the person who was supposed to issue the letter for my daughters. And he said, I left, but I left the letter with my assistant. So my staff got the letter, and because he couldn't catch a car because the traffic was awful, all the roads were blocked, he walked back. And I was in different WhatsApp groups with group of women, civil society, hundreds of people. They were all asking questions about what's going to happen. I texted one of the members of the negotiation team in the Taliban. We knew them. So I said, what's happening? And he said, I can assure you that, we, in similar language, I would say, not exactly the same, that we will not enter Kabul until 2 weeks, until the negotiation gave an outcome. So we are not entering Kabul. And I said, but why are people talking about Taliban entering Kabul from north, from west, from south? They were naming certain places of the city. He said, I don't know. And so there was a lot of uncertainty. People were going to the airport. Traffic was closed. When at 1:30 or 2, we heard the breaking news that the president fled. And by 3:30, the Taliban were in the palace.
Wow.
Wow.
And so there was a primetime media. So Yeah, so there was a lot of shooting here and there. There was a lot of chaos, total chaos. I was still at home, and my
Wow.
bodyguards and my security, they had to de-uniform themselves, remove the uniform, everything. They send their uniforms home because their security check was outside my home.
Mhm.
Mm.
And with they only kept their pistols. They sent the gun as well, the machine gun, because they were afraid that maybe the Taliban will come and search. And so my family came and said, everyone knows this is your house. You are a public figure. People know this is your house. So you can't be a target in your home. You should, at least for tonight, you should go somewhere. So my father's house is like 20 minutes by walk from where I live. So we went to my father's house, which is like on top of the hill. And we were watching the 10 p.m. news, which is the primetime news. Usually I used to get, when we were doing something important, I would come to that media, to that news. Like the whole Afghanistan would watch that primetime news at 10 o'clock. It's like, one of the most popular news channel
Yeah.
that will basically cover
Everyone will.
everything, the mainstream. So we were watching when they showed the palace where the flag was changed from 3 colors to Taliban black and white color, and everybody in the home, like in the room, was full of all my relatives, like sisters and cousins and my daughters as well. They all started crying because it was like a nightmare. All of a sudden you see, like, it's for so many people who remember Taliban first time 20 years back. It was like 21 years, so many things changed. And then all of a sudden, you go back to 20 years ago. To me, it was a nightmare because I was looking at my daughters when they were very young, the Taliban, like very young, 2 years old, 1.5 years old, when the Taliban first were in power. Now to see them, they're teenager, they're grown up, but even not teenager, they're adults. But the same Taliban, the same situation. So for us to process that mentally was a lot. And the women, the girls, everybody started crying. They got emotional.
Especially since that day, I'm so surprised that there was so little communication of what's going on. In this day where we're so used to social media, you get quick updates. Seems that there was zero information, and boom, 10 p.m. you watch the news and you see this flag change. It's like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah, it was a huge trauma for all of us. I think a lot of people, a lot of us, and the ordinary people on the ground, they have not been able to really digest that trauma.
To this day.
Still.
What were your experiences negotiating with the Taliban? Like, what were your negotiation tactics? What did you learn? What is their ideology?
The only thing I didn't realize, honestly, or I didn't get to know until now, is their ideology. I don't really know their ideology is on the basis of what, because their interpretation of Islam is very different than what we, as Muslim, know. So this was the first thing, that they have, some of them, they even don't have an education. So to claim that they are, fighting to basically enforce Islam, while you do not have that knowledge of that same religion, how can people trust you? I think my negotiation period for 1 year in Doha was the most, I would say, stressful time of my life. Not because negotiations were difficult. I wanted to be in the room. I wanted to have progress. I wanted to face the Taliban. And I wanted to, like, I had enough in my plates, and we all had enough in our plates to bring to the table. But what was the stressful part of the negotiation was the fact that Taliban wouldn't take it serious. They signed the deal with Americans, and they thought they were actually victorious. So they just would, like, bypass time, and they will just kill time.
Wow.
They wouldn't come to negotiation. And for them, they had their families in Doha. So for them, it was life as usual. But for us, we were far away from our people, far away from our family, in a hotel, on a mission, trying to achieve something. There was a lot of pressure from our families, from our constituency, from our country, from the media on what is the update. Every day they were asking for update. And there was no update because the Taliban wouldn't come to seriously commit time for negotiation, to talk about major issues. It was like either you listen to what we say and you agree to that, or we don't come to negotiation. And at some point, several times, I decided to just leave personally,
Mm.
to go back to Afghanistan and say to the people that this is the situation. But I didn't predict the outcome would be such a big failure, right? And resulting the country collapsing to Taliban. So I didn't want to take responsibility for the collapse of the negotiation
Mm.
by leaving from the negotiation. But it was very well. There were days that I was feeling very proud. I was feeling very connected. I was feeling
Mm.
that I'm an equal representative of my country, the same way as the Taliban claim. While they ignore me, they don't even believe in my presence, but I'm equal representative. And I think women inclusion in the negotiation team really changed the status quo. It brings a lot of knowledge,
Mm.
a very different view, and sustainability to the peace process, because it goes more than just a political agreement. It's like women understand, and especially Afghanistan peace process was about women rights.
Mm.
It was about women basically. So we brought a lot of weight, a lot of wisdom, knowledge, and different perspective
Mm.
to the negotiation table.
How was it, because the Taliban obviously have this certain view towards women. So being a woman, how was that experience? Did they dismiss you? What challenges did you face when trying to speak to them?
They certainly wanted to dismiss. Most often, they wouldn't even look at your eyes or your face, um, or they wouldn't even call you by your name. So they would try to dismiss. But the more they would try to dismiss, the more I was feeling empowered,
Mm.
because I knew that I'm their target
Mm.
for my gender. When I say I, means all the 4 women who were in the negotiation. So the more they will try to dismiss, the more I would feel empowered,
Mhm.
and encouraged for my position to be
Mm.
stronger, to be to the point, to be equipped with arguments and with knowledge that look at the agenda and prepare myself, you know try to be the best version of myself, because
Mm.
as a woman there is always that expectation,
Mm.
from the way you wear clothes, your outfit, to the way you present yourself, to the way you talk. Everything is important.
Mm. It's yeah. It, it's hard for me to, really understand the ideology as we were talking about. Like, why is it so important for the Taliban to, as if, control women or keep women down? Like, why is it so important for women not to get an education? This is something I have a hard time, understanding. And you made a good point also last time saying, they talk about they want to implement, their law based on Islam, but Islam tells you need to seek knowledge, you need to read. How can you do that if you're denied an education?
Yeah, and it's like there's no self-awareness whatsoever. It's like they don't realize they're they're destroying this country. I
I
mean,
know.
women can't even walk by themselves to the park. They have to be in a man's company. You're excluding such a large proportion of your population from the workforce. Like, I don't understand how they can't see how destructive
the
this
impor-
is.
the importance of women participation. I think it's also about their upbringing
Mm.
and also the way they were trained. Um, their upbringing, because most of these people have grown up in families where woman only has a space in the kitchen.
Mm.
And also but then you expose yourself to society, to your education institution, to the cities, and your mind changed. But for these people, then their exposure was even to more extreme places, which was the madrasas,
Mm.
the religious school, which does not teach them even proper religious subjects. So and the whole idea that the Taliban first came was about suppression of women, and they gained legitimacy on that base.
Mm.
So they thought that they will continue that. But first time when they came to power, Afghanistan was in chaos. There was a war, and people like wanted a change. So majority of people also didn't know how to resist Taliban or how to challenge them, including women. They didn't believe in themselves. They didn't believe in other life or the freedom, I would say, because the Taliban were very brutal. So the Taliban got identity with suppressing women and their power. That's their power base. They continue to have that. For the past 20 years, they said in Afghanistan, women in Kabul, women are not Muslim, they're infidel, they have converted because they're not truly practicing Islam. And that's how they brainwashed the younger generation. So, people who were in the villages, their perspective was that women in Kabul or big cities are all infidels. They're just working they're puppets of Americans and the Western world. They did not believe in women's own identity. They thought women are just a commodity of the Western world. When they came to Kabul, some of their foot soldiers actually started thinking that, seeing around and seeing that it's not true, that women are Muslim, they're strong, they're educated, and they're committed to their identity. So this was a propaganda against women. They started associating themselves with their leaders. And some of them, in fact, joined ISIS or Daesh. So for Taliban to keep their foot soldiers, they continuously weaponize women for their propaganda machine, to keep their unity, to keep their kind of legitimacy for their power base. And that's why they are, and they know that educated women will challenge them. That's what women have been doing since the Taliban returned. They have gone to streets, they have challenged them, they have, so that's why they target. And you're right. I mean, the country is suffering from economic crisis while women cannot work.
Sorry if this comes across as ignorant, but is there like a small segment of Afghani society, or just a segment at all, that kind of supports the ultra-conservative ideas that the Taliban espoused? Are there actually people on the ground who sort of like the Taliban?
Yes, I think so, because you have these kind of small radicalized communities in any country, right? And it's in growth.
So you think Taliban supporters are growing?
I think their radicalized views and very extreme views in the global north and global south are growing. I think, the far rights are winning anywhere. So it's not only Afghanistan. It's if you look at other countries, and you are surprised how these like highly educated, aware people voted for certain leaders. So it's that notion of radicalization, I guess. But in Afghanistan, Taliban do have some constituents. There are some people who actually believe that the girls should not go to school, that women cannot go to work. They believe that. But what makes it worse is when these marginalized views become part of the policy of the government. Because people have different views in any society. I'm sure there are people who in the UK who don't want their girls to go to school, probably maybe a small community. Yeah. I don't know. But if it becomes part of the government policy, then that's a problem. Then this is where the apartheid starts.
How was it like for you growing up as a girl in Afghanistan? Like, at what moment did you realize there was such discrimination against women?
Yes, I actually grew up as a child facing discrimination in every stage of my life. When I was born, the first day, I wasn't favored. Like my mother didn't want to have a girl. Throughout my life, I faced, discrimination. I faced ignorant policies by not only policies, behaviors. The misogynistic approach of people in my family, outside my family. But I always had my mother in my support. So my mother would send me to school while everybody else was against sending me.
So how did she go? So she didn't want a girl at first?
Yeah, because she would say, well, she wanted to have a boy because my father wanted to have a boy. Not because she didn't love a girl. And she said always to me that, I didn't want you to be a girl to suffer as much as I suffered. Yet another woman, yet another struggle and suffering. So she also was very strong, but suffered a lot. So she said she didn't want to, let alone in my family, my father married 7 times, 5 wives on top of my mother. So it was every time he married to somebody else, she was like, I was torn into pieces inside. Nobody would see me. Yeah, because I was she was like I was eating myself inside as a woman, but I can see that people don't see me, that I'm actually collapsing inside. So it was an enormous pain, and that's why she didn't want another girl. But later on, she always put her trust on me and tell me that you will be somebody in the future. And I didn't know initially what that somebody means. She always trusted me. She had this, she also put all her investment on me in a way that, she would just stand against my brothers to send me to school. She would do everything to make me to the standard of a city girl. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My upbringing was done afterwards in a way that I would be an outspoken, kind of girl that would challenge people and question everything, and she would encourage me.
She was almost preparing you for.
She was preparing me for, she would laugh when I was she was always graceful. She would laugh when I would do something to challenge a status quo, to challenge a stereotype lifestyle of any girl. If I challenge that, she would be very happy, and she would start talking about it in the bigger family gatherings, etc. And that was an encouragement for me. I knew that my mother is by my side. And her really, really focus was on education. Not only secular education that she sent me to school, but also Islamic education. She would teach me Islamic education because she knew that. She was taught Islamic education. And she was always graceful. And she would even tell to my brothers and sisters, she will be somebody, you will what? But she wanted me to be a doctor. So somebody for her, being a medical doctor as a woman already was a huge thing in our family. So, but also she would say, you will be, I don't know where that belief came, that she thought I'll be somebody. At least, maybe now I think about it and I'm like, maybe she thought that at least you will be somebody who will raise the voice of those who didn't, including herself, have the chance to do so. For that, yeah.
So what drove you into politics? Was it mostly because of the marginalization of women, or?
Yeah, well, firstly, because my father was a member of parliament, so I come from a political family. But, it's in my gene, I would say. But I never, when I was a child, I never wanted to. Although I was involved in daily political life because, even then when my father was killed, people used to come to present their problem to my mother, to my brothers. Our house was always full of guests where they wanted us to help them in several ways, take them to the doctor. They were coming from the faraway villages. So there was that, the expectation from our house was that social protection house for everybody. So I already knew how to be connected with people, how to be grow up among people. But I think mostly I was inspired when the Taliban suppressed women. I was inspired internally, to have the passion to change. And I was like, this is not the right way one should lead the country. So everything the Taliban were doing, I was questioning it. Even if not very strongly internally, I was questioning it. And I developed anger and frustration towards that. And I wanted to change that. It was inside me. Everything. I was going to meet my husband in prison. I was going, when they were beating and whipping women in front of my eyes or mane, I was I never actually purchased a burqa. The Taliban wants women to wear burqa, right? So I was wearing in protest, I didn't purchase a burqa because I didn't want to make them happy and spend money on something that I don't believe in it. So although I was wearing scarf and I was wearing hijab, so once I remember the Taliban Vice and Virtue car came, and usually when they had a Vice and Virtue car with loudspeakers who would go around the city and say to people, oh, people, you have to pray. This is pray time. Close your shops, go to pray. People, you have to, this gentleman, you have to behave. You have to put your certain measure of beard. The woman, why are you not like all of that? So they will finger point at everybody and ask him to behave. This was like a loudspeaker and white Ranger cars, like Hilux pickup cars with loudspeaker. Once I saw, and you could hear their voice with loudspeaker from a very far away. So once I went out, and we didn't get the chance to go out a lot because there was nothing to do. So I went out and I heard the Vice and Virtue car, making noise and asking people to go to pray because it's Salah time, it's pray time. So even like they were forcing people to pray while this is something between you and your God, right? So I was like in the middle of the road and with my hijab, and they would just whip you because they don't like women. They wanted to see every woman with burqa, so like completely covered. So I didn't know what to do. I looked right and left and I didn't know what to do because I was in the middle of the road. What I did was I went to the corner of the road and I just turned my face to the wall and I closed my eyes and turned my face and I said, no matter what, if they come and whip me from the backside, at least I don't want to see them. I kind of closed my eyes and I said, if they do whatever they do in the back, I don't want to see them whip or kill or whatever, but I don't want to see them. So I put myself I was also scared, honestly. Put my face in the wall and I was like, I don't know what is going to happen next. I just closed my eyes and closed my ear. And then I said, let whatever happens, happens. But what I was surprised, they didn't see me. They just passed. And I was like, when is now the whipping going to come? When? And then like the sound started getting distance. And I was like, where is the car? So they didn't see me, yeah.
Wow. But you're just so brave. You essentially live in this perpetual state of fear all the time, especially someone like you who wants to directly challenge the Taliban, not wear the burqa, fight for your rights.
Yeah.
Can't imagine.
Every woman in Afghanistan, I think, is very brave, and even men. Like nowadays, a lot of women really challenge the Taliban and in their own ways.
How do you connect to the women of Afghanistan?
Inside, we do every day through like social media, WhatsApp, Zoom, Viber still, because a lot of women actually from the rural areas have Viber. They send me messages on Facebook. So WhatsApp is the main means of.
But how do you inspire the women to keep on fighting, to believe in their rights?
We have smaller group meetings. We have I do a lot of media outreach, so interviews and like small group Zoom meetings. Also, I do. I have offices across Afghanistan to connect with women. But it's also very difficult to encourage women to resist because they are very brutal. They can just, shoot at women or arrest them and take them to the prison. I don't want to take the risk for them. Like I don't want to give them the feeling that I'm in London or Europe or US and I'm actually putting their lives at risk. So I just leave it to them. If they need my support in organizing a protest or, challenging or something, I'm there for them. But I don't encourage them to protest because it comes with a lot of cost to the women and to their families.
Okay. Even yourself, you've gone through several assassination attempts, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to, I don't want them to be experiencing the same.
Could you talk about those assassination attempts? What is it like to have someone come for your life?
Well, I guess some of these very difficult moments of your life, once you are in those moments, then it might not look as scary as if you talk about it, right? Sometimes they say when you are in the middle of fire, it might feel less as if you are in the fear of fire. So yeah, I'm smiling not because it's easy, but I'm smiling because I keep blaming myself. When I was attacked last time in 2020, like in August, 14th of August, my right hand was injured, and they shoot from the backside. And I was like on the way to the hospital, I was thinking to myself, what did I do? Like when somebody is even prepared to kill you, that means they have to like plan this in advance, right?
Mm.
So a lot of resources goes to that planning, a lot of resources, preparation, and all of that. And the person must have a lot of commitment to what he's doing.
Yeah.
So what did I do wrong that I actually hurt him so much that he has put all that, like, or they, maybe a group of them, they put so much planning, time, resources to do this, while to me, I haven't done anything to hurt somebody like that.
Mm.
You know, and sometimes when I share this to my family, they're like, even for this, you blame yourself.
Mm.
Why are you blaming yourself? They are a group of, fanatic people who want to just kill anybody who has a different voice. And for them, that's a victory.
Mm.
Why do you blame yourself? And I was really blaming myself. When I was going to the hospital, I was like, what did I do wrong that
Mm.
people could be so, affected, that could do all the planning to kill me
Mm.
for what I have, like for the things that I believe I'm doing, which is good for my country and for the humanity.
But because you also represent the fight for women's rights, and this is something that goes completely against the Taliban, and we talked about how this is something that they gained power from, is talking about controlling women and this and that. So essentially, by fighting for these rights, you are standing against
Their power.
their power. You're like a barrier there. So
If you look at it from that perspective, yes. But even if somebody is like a barrier to my power, I wouldn't dare to kill them.
mm,
Instead, why don't you come and talk and challenge them, right?
mm,
So even if like the Taliban took everything from us, they took our country, my identity, everything from us. All the rights that my sisters had and I had, the country that I belonged to, my identity, the status that I had, and like basically erased us from our geography. But I still want to talk sometimes. Like I want to put them on justice, on trial. I want to see them behind the bars, but I don't want to like pick up a gun and shoot them
mm.
because it needs a lot of courage, I would say, in a negative way, a lot of commitment to something. So yeah, it's bad for them because why would you kill somebody who is like only speaking?
So when you had the negotiation with the Taliban, were you able to engage in some conversations with them?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
did they? I feel like a lot of times where people don't want to talk, when they end up talking, they kind of expose themselves, right? You want to, if you believe in something, you want to, talk about it and see maybe where you're wrong. If you really believe in something, then you shouldn't have a problem talking about it because that's the truth.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. They should. That's what we negotiated. We wanted them to come forward and expose their ideas. Well, some of their ideas during negotiation, like they were only referring to women Islamic rights. So when I was telling them, what does that mean? Because women Islamic rights can be very vague, right? It depends on the interpretation. It depends on, different jurisprudence. It depends on also the book that you're reading, the interpretation. It's not like a straightforward interpretation that from one country to another, it's the same. Even the laws are different from every country. So what does that mean when you say Islamic rights of women? And then they were silent because, they knew that they would be challenged if they go to the details.
And how is it like today? We're far a little bit from 2020, 2021. Taliban has been in power. What's it like for women today? What's the state of Afghanistan like today?
Afghanistan is no longer making headlines. I know there are many other conflicts who have taken over the media and the headlines and even the tables of policymakers. But I must say, Afghanistan is a chronic pain and wound, and it's still open. Um, 3.5 years that we lost everything. It's for me, it's just yesterday because I'm in that sense of urgency that I will go back to Afghanistan, that we will change, we'll regain our country, we will change the situation. Because, when I watch the movies or the news or listen to the radio and listen to the pain of those women, like this morning, I was listening to a radio show and a woman said that she had 4 daughters. And she had always hoped when people, because in Afghanistan, if you don't have a son, means your life is not completed. So people will always question you because your son is the identity holder of the family. It was changing in the cities, but in the rural areas, it was still the same. So she said in the morning show with her close identity, she said, before 2021, a lot of people ask me, how much do you have in your bank account? And I would say, each of my daughters is a bank for me. It's a bank of hope, education, knowledge. And she said, 3 of my daughters were studying medical doctors. And they were like becoming surgeons, like very serious profession in medical studies. And I had a younger daughter who was in grade 10. So when the Taliban came, there was no any other choice. I told her, I will send you to nursing school. So you become a nurse. At least you study something. So from the medical studies where my 3 daughters were doing, to become surgeons. Now, my younger daughter went to become a nurse. And I said, as long as it's an education, it's fine. But in December 2024, last December, like a month ago or more than a month ago, they banned women from going to become nurse or midwife.
Wow.
And she said, my daughter basically didn't get out of her bed for 3 days. And she was like, with her, everybody was in the same situation. She doesn't even like take shower because it's a big mental health issue also. So unfortunately, the world has forgotten Afghanistan, but I think it's time for us to make the Taliban accountable. I think we should bring more Taliban leaders to ICC. I think more countries should join to support Taliban's arrest and bringing their leaders to the court, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court. I think the world should pressurize them. The same countries who paved the way for them to go to power should pressurize them, should hold them accountable. We should stop sending, untracked money to Taliban. Of course, I'm not saying we should stop humanitarian aid. And that will weaken them. And it will result to a change.
Afghanistan actually this week started coming back in the headlines, but maybe in a not positive way. Now that Trump is back in power, they're talking about stopping USAID, like US aid, and Afghanistan came up. And
I think Afghanistan is the only case where a lot of people are happy about that stop, the pause in the money, because it will only embolden Taliban.
So you think it's a positive thing?
Because Afghanistan has received $7 billion in aid for the past 3 years, right? 3.7 billion comes from the US. So out of 7 billion, 3.7 is now, let's say, suspended. The other 4 point something humanitarian aid must continue, including the US humanitarian aid must continue. But there are rumors that Taliban also receive cash, untracked money. And this is where they get their soldiers paid, they make their, staff paid, all of that. That is something we don't know where it's coming from. There is no account, there is no transparency about it. And the moment the aid was cut or suspended, the Afghani currency value really decreased, and dollar increased the Taliban were basically struggling with their economy, the crumbled economy. So I think that is a good sign for us because we want to see the Taliban weaken.
So there's an incredible inefficiency and lack of tracking in the money that the U.S. was sending to Afghanistan. And this change in U.S. aid could mean now that they're looking at
more transparency and more accountability on where the money is going and how it's spent in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, Fawzia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was an absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you.
Thank you.